This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast brought to you by the Genesis Company, coming at you Thursday afternoon. It's December 21st. We're going to sneak in an episode here before the Wolves play the Lakers on Thursday night. Obviously, a back-to-back here, but we still want to get a Brit episode in. Brit, amongst other things, I want to talk about the Miami game and stuff too, but what's most fresh on our mind is the Wednesday night loss to the Sixers, dropped the Wolves to 20-6. And I think the place to start with that game, because it has so many spider webs off of it, is just with Joel Embiid and the 51 points that he had in that game. Multiple factors, right, behind those 51 points, the way he was defended, the way he was officiated, and then just also just acknowledged really good, one of, if not the best players in the league there. I think it was all three factors. But judging from your Twitter feed last night, it seemed that you put a lot of emphasis on one of those three factors. So I know actually sometimes like I tweet something and it's just something that was on my mind. It might not actually be my entire thought on it, but you're pretty peeved about the officiating.
We talked yesterday before the game just about,
you were already pissed. You were already pissed about how Embiid.
Joel Embiid brings out the worst in me.
Yes.
Seriously. I am offended by the inconsistency of how he is officiated. I don't understand, and it isn't just last night. I mean, every team in the NBA practically goes through this, where Embiid will use his 7-foot, 280-pound frame to hammer guys who weigh 50 pounds at minimum less. And yet, if those same players brush his wrist in the middle of him going up, that's a foul.
Yeah.
The replays on the drives of McDaniels and Ant showed contact, hard contact.
Yeah.
No whistles. Ant got an immediate tee out of one of them. Appropriately so. The fouls that Embiid was drawing, Embiid did not receive as much physical punishment in that game as any member of the Wolves starting lineup. I'm serious.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so,
different. Okay, go ahead. Keep going.
So what you're doing there is, yes, he is extremely adept at coaxing fouls. But what I would ask is, when Kevin Durant became extremely adept at the rip-through move, people began to realize, hey, wait a minute, yeah, he can do that all the time, and D'Lo can do that all the time, and these people can do that all the time, but is that really what we want?
Mm-hmm.
And so what they did is they said, well, from now on, it's not a shooting foul. You just take it over on the sideline. Mm-hmm. Embiid does a subtle version of the rip-through foul. He comes up straight instead of to the side, but his arms are long enough, and he sells it well enough that fouls that are not intended to be direct counters to the way he is going to the hoop get whistled as shooting fouls, and he goes to the free throw line. Jim Pete had a great stat during the game. The Sixers are 14th in the league in the number of fouls that are called in their play. They're first in free throws. That's because they know how to gull officials and opponents into cheap shooting fouls. And I think it sucks. I don't like watching that kind of game. And it made a difference last night in that Gobert went to the bench. Rudy Gobert, when the Wolves were on the floor, had a 106 defensive rating. When Naz Reid was on the floor, it was 166. Seriously, it made a difference. And
let's hold on.
And if Embiid had been in foul trouble, he got 5 fouls.
Yeah.
Okay. What if the one on McDaniels and the one on Ant?
Yeah.
all of a sudden Embiid's in foul trouble.
For
what
sure.
kind of impact does that have on the game?
Yeah, no, I wasn't trying to cut you off because I don't think that is relevant. I just think it's like these are a couple different things, right? That we need to talk about. I just thought you were gonna get on and get pissed about it, and that was really like well put. That I hadn't even thought about the exact mechanics of the rip through and the changes that they've made in this. And yeah, that was particularly the Gobert and Towns one when like Embiid's at like 13 feet, like just in front of the nail. He must have got 2 or 3 or 4 of those last night. It's a tricky thing, right? Because the thing we can probably all agree on is aesthetically, it's not fun, right? Like this takes away. It's the similar to James Harden or whatever in the peak Houston days. It is a rule though, and it happens every game. This, I was right before that game. I watched the Sixers' previous game against the Bulls, and this is it was the same story. So it becomes about a couple different things. It's like, can we be frustrated in the way in which he's being officiated? 100%. This is bad. A change needs to happen. Change isn't going to happen, this season. It's not going to happen if the Wolves or whoever the Sixers play in the next game, Embiid's going to play the same way. And you just need to like operate under those restraints, unfortunately. And I think it's important like to acknowledge that those were total fouls on McDaniels and Ant, and it would have changed the fabric of that game if Embiid would have been in foul trouble too. And quite frankly, as I'm like sitting there after the game, I'm like, damn, like Embiid, he got to the line doing all of his stuff. He was lethal from mid-range when he wasn't getting fouled. It's like, what are the answers here?
Right.
And I want to talk about like some of the ways he was defended and Gobert versus Reed versus Towns and all that too. But probably the best thing that could have happened was him getting in foul trouble. That's probably the best thing any team can do against him.
Right.
Is go at him as McDaniels did, which props. I mean, McDaniels went hard at him. Obviously, Ant went as hard at him as anyone maybe ever has on that dunk attempt that didn't get called. So I think that was smart. And I think should probably be the most frustrating element of that game is that those fouls on Embiid weren't called. And personally, less so, in my opinion, is less so frustration with the fouls that Embiid created because those happen every single game. And while I disagree that that's the way that the game should be played, it's the way the game is played right now. And I don't know what more we can, you could really say or do about it. It's a hack that he's found.
A couple of things.
Yep.
First of all, when he plays the Bulls and Vucevic gets in foul trouble, it's a very different thing than if Gobert gets in foul trouble.
Yeah.
Okay, so the idea of the guy guarding Embiid, now maybe what the answer to that is you have Cat on Embiid as you have done previously, guys like Jokic, and have Gobert be more of a floater. Because Cat actually had his head on straighter than any other player on the Wolves last night and played extremely well, both in terms of not being intimidated by Embiid's physicality, but also not being intimidated by Embiid's foul drawing tendencies. So having that kind of attitude and acknowledging the fact that the way Embiid plays can be especially injurious to a Wolves team that has Rudy Gobert as its defensive anchor is one thing. Another thing I would mention is just consistent refereeing is really, if you're going to call touch fouls on Embiid, and they are technically fouls, a lot of them, if not all of them, then it just needs to be officiated the same way the other way, and then let the chips fall where they may.
Can I ask you a question off of that?
Yeah.
So again, and I am by no means saying that the Ant and Jaden and a couple other ones weren't fouls. I think those were missed.
Right.
But they are a different type of foul. Like Embiid didn't have a lot of like head downhill rumbling fouls drawn last night, which is the type of fouls that Ant and Jaden were trying to get there, right? The downhill attacks fouled at the rim.
Yes.
That's a different type of foul call than the mid-range one, right? And so that's what I, during the commercials, I'm checking Twitter or whatever. It's like, why aren't they being called on the other end? They should be, but I think it's somewhat important to point out that those are very different types of fouls. And I don't think mechanically Ant and Jaden were hunting fouls the way that Embiid was. And it's bad to hunt fouls. That takes away from the game completely. But to me, not to excuse it, but there's a little bit of apples and oranges there, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but the question is, to follow that analogy, which is the juicier fruit? Yeah. Let's say, and if you're saying, well, they want to remove the juice, well, therefore you remove the orange. You don't remove the apple. I mean, so if you want to prevent the game from getting too physical and out of hand, you remove the hard foul at the rim. You don't remove the touch foul at the mid-range. That's point. One thing. The other thing is, and this isn't my idea, this is something that I saw on Twitter last night, and, have maybe thought of in the past, but it was refreshed in my mind. I don't think it's a coincidence that the Sixers don't, and Embiid in particular, don't perform well in the playoffs when referees swallow their whistles more often, because he's become so reliant on it. And that, again, aesthetically, I'll just get back to the reason why he brings out the worst in me is because he could be a bully, and instead he wants to be a victim. Mm-hmm. He knows that victimization is a surer way to get what he needs, at least in the regular season.
And that's the problem. The NBA and the way they're officiating is making that the victim mentality more profitable than the bully mentality. Exactly. Two things that Embiid, because he's one of, if not the best player in the league, could be great at, Right. And so, yeah, okay. We did that. I think an interesting element, I was just really going into the game pre-fouls, pre-whatever.
Right.
I was just curious.
You kind of have to prepare yourself.
Yeah.
To watch the Sixers, you have to know, don't get too upset,
Yeah. I was just curious to see how they were going to guard him,
Right.
And just how it played out. Like earlier this week when we were talking about that matchup, I was like, well, I don't think you can't do the Jokic thing. Because
not really. Although, slow-mo, actually, I made the case for slow-mo during the game. The problem is that slow-mo is so horrible on offense right now that you can't really, I mean, the differential, he's never been better in terms of defensive effectiveness on this team. He's a Swiss Army knife on defense now. I thought he was the preferred matchup for Butler and the preferred matchup for Embiid. I mean, that's ridiculous.
They went with Embiid on him, and I kind of expected, with Gobert on Embiid,
right.
Because it didn't seem like going into it that there was a matchup for Gobert to hide off of, because Batum has typically been starting at the 4, right? So I was like, I don't think they're going to do that because they're not going to leave Batum open. So I think they're going to guard Embiid straight up with Gobert, and they did.
Even without Batum.
Even without Batum. But, you're kind of like making – I wonder, if it's a playoff series, right? If Batum literally got hurt 24 hours before the game happened, so how much could you even, prepare for all of that? But regardless, the plan is clearly we are trusting the defensive player of the year this season to do as good of a job as he can on Embiid. And, if he gets in – some foul trouble, we're going to have to get away with some minutes with Carl's on him, maybe Nas is on him, whatever. The thing that very first offensive possession for the Wolves, Gobert picks up an offensive foul when after they try to feed him on a duck in under the basket, which I just don't understand why that's a big part of the offense, particularly first possession of the game offense.
Agreed.
But he picks up that offensive foul, and I go right away on my notes. I'm like, that's one. And now you got the whole I know Embiid he's going to play the whole quarter. So you're like, all right, 11 minutes. can Rudy play these next, or how many of these next 11 minutes can Rudy play without picking up the second one? About another minute 40 goes by, he picks up a defensive one on Embiid, which is like, it's about as fast as it goes, you know?
Right.
And then that just right then and there, it shifts your plan, you know,
Right.
and you need to survive with Carl on him here when it's a smaller group. Now Nas checks in for him. And the proposition of extended minutes in a game rather than 5 to 8 or whatever within Carl on Embiid is different, you know? And to Embiid's credit, like that turned the light bulb on in his head where he's like, all right, I already got one of them out of here. Now I have the easier option guarding me one-on-one. I'm going to score now, or I'm going to get 2 on him. And it gets even easier after that, which happened a couple minutes later. Carl picks up 2. He has to go to the bench. And now Nas is on him. Like, Embiid is hunting this stuff in a kind of gross way, but it's like pretty logical and effective in how it's like, it just
made all the more effective by the fact that he hit 12 of his first 13 mid-ranges.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, if you're going to be Kevin Durant out there, then it's even tougher because you can't leave him alone. The alternative is, all right, just don't get in his space. Let him take the shot.
Right.
Well, we see what happens. 12 for 13 is the equivalent of 85, 90% free throw shooting. Anyway, the only difference is you don't have the fouls on you, but the efficiency of the points is the same.
Right.
And I don't mean to change the subject abruptly, but I know we're concentrating on Embiid and how he's defended and all this other stuff. To me, the key to the game was that, especially in the second half, the Wolves bench just got schooled with Embiid on the bench.
Let's I want to talk about that. That's going to be a 10-minute topic. So let me grab our first break here. Today's show is brought to you by Falling Knife Brewing Company. We have a Wolves game tonight against the Lakers, and then also on Saturday the Wolves play the Kings. Those are options, obviously, for getting out. Maybe families in town, whatever you want to go watch the Wolves. Go watch it at Falling Knife, big screens, sound on. It's, I think, the place to be watching these games. But also, we did this at this time last year, promoted Falling Knife's New Year's early party that they do. It's all you can eat, all you can drink on New Year's Eve for $85. The kind of cool idea with it is it's early. They do the ball drop and the whatever at 8 p.m. So it's 6 to 10 p.m. The idea is, get a quick, a cheap.
Get your drunk ass off the road.
Exactly. Get home, be home by 10 or whatever. So I know a lot of Wolves fans or people who listen to this show attended that last year, wanted to put that on your radar. If you go to if you do have Instagram, just a good idea. If you are thinking about Falling Knife, follow them on Instagram at FKBC. And if you do that there, they have a link in their bio to sign up for this New Year's early party at Falling Knife. Again, recommend. I think it just kind of sounds like a good idea. If you are good, it's more fun to go out for New Year's Eve, but it gets really unfun later. So I think this is a good way to go about it. So Falling Knife Brewing Company in Northeast Minneapolis, check that out for New Year's early.
They have a new beer called Idle Disposition. It tastes like a pine cone. I mean,
is that a positive thing, Britt?
I think it is. Well, for me, it is. I guess they have like Idaho 7 hops or something. I mean, I'm not a real technical guy. All I know is that there are pine trees around the can, and it is a definite pine aftertaste in the beer. And I would say 5 out of 6 sips, I really, really like it. Every 6th sip or so, I go, maybe that's a little too much pine.
Yeah.
But it's unique, and I like pine in my beer. I like that kind of, it's a combination of wet and dry at the same time. And anyway, it's, I don't know if, I found it in South Minneapolis, I'm sure, wherever it is. I think
No, that's a good plug. They are like in. I mean, they're in every like liquor store that I'm going to, and I'm looking at the craft beer section, or honestly, just when like we go out to eat, I'm seeing Falling Knife on the tap list there too. So yeah, that's just a way to kind of try them out.
Anyway, I found it. I mean, verbal tip is usually my thing, but
yeah, me too.
I figured, what the heck, I'd try this Idle Disposition as well, and it was
Wintry.
It was surprisingly good. It was very good.
Okay, let's. I think it was wise to bring up the non-Embiid minutes. That has been the weakness of Philly this season, is when Embiid is off the floor. The Sixers have been bad this year. And in this game, he played 36 minutes. They were a +4, and they won those 36 minutes by only 4 points. And in the 12 minutes he sat, the Sixers won by 12. And I don't think that was really a product of like garbage time, because I remember writing that down in the first half too. That's something that any team needs to do to capitalize against the Sixers team. And I also think part of why the Wolves didn't was a product of the foul trouble.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like if they get, if Embiid gets some of the best players in foul trouble, those players aren't going to be in Cat, Rudy, whatever, for the non-Embiid minutes. They needed others to step up in those minutes and not only play those even, they needed to win those. They needed to win those. If Embiid's going to have 51, you got to win the non-Embiid minutes by 10, and they lost.
Right.
10. So I thought that was a huge factor.
Nas was the Wolves were -27 in the 20 minutes Nas was on the floor. They were -10 in the 12:40 slow-mo was on the floor. They were, I don't know what Nas plus minus was, but I know his net rating was -63.5. I mean, so and I think, to be honest with you,
minus 24 and 15.5 minutes for now.
Okay, and I don't think it's a coincidence that Pat Bev had a very good game playing against Na a lot of it, and that Pat Bev is a guy who he needs to motivate himself in various ways. He needs to garner attention and basically be the star of his own show whenever that show is playing. And playing against the Timberwolves, I think, was extra motivation for him. And he played extremely well. He did a lot of things at both ends of the floor that were very helpful. And I thought he was helpful when Embiid was off the floor. So, I mean, I think that it was not one of Nas' better games. It was not one of Nas's better games. And those two guys have been killing it. They have been great for the past 10 days. And so that really hurts this team when both Na and Nas have a bad game at the same time. And they had egregiously bad games. They were, they just got wiped.
Yeah, I want to focus on the Nas part a little bit, because
some of that was obviously Embiid. He was on the floor guarding Embiid, right?
Well, what stood out to me right away is, again, Gobert picks up his second foul in like 2 minutes and 40 seconds into the game or something like that, and so Nas comes in, right? And so I'm thinking, okay, like Cat's obviously, going to guard Embiid, and that that's what I'm thinking of at first. And
then they get Tobias Harris, right?
Yeah, and then I was surprised when the Wolves got onto offense that Embiid didn't guard Cat, and they kept Harris on Cat, and then they had Embiid, quote unquote, on Nas. But that's the most ignored I've ever seen Nas be. And it was, I was kind of, I saw it the very first possession. I paused it. I'm like, okay, well, we know Nas takes, if he's open, he's going to take a three. And I was like, okay, well, this could be a game breaker. Like, get the game back to even.
Right. Same way with the Jaden McDaniels punished ignorance.
Exactly. And I want to get to that too. But that was the thing, is Embiid was doing the lurk. He was treating Naz Reid the way Rudy Gobert treats Aaron Gordon. And Naz missed 3 threes in the first couple minutes he was on the floor. And I thought that really set a bad tone for the non-Gobert minutes, right?
Right.
And I just think that's super important to be able to punish that for any team, right?
Right.
If somebody isn't being guarded legitimately, you need to be able to punish that. And the thing with Nas versus Kyle Anderson is
Right.
he can,
That's his bread and butter, right?
And it wasn't. And that really, I think, disrupted things offensively for this team in that game last night. But to your point with McDaniels, the Wolves just about made up for all of the deficit in the first half by Jaden having 19 and Cat having 16. They decided, those were the two players outside of Nas in that situation that were being kind of dared, They were like, okay, Cat, like, go see what you can do against, Tobias Harris and largely single coverage, maybe some lurking help, obviously the Embiid lurking help. They're like, let's see what Cat can do here. And Cat had 16 in the first half. He was great. And then Jaden was even greater. He's the classic, like, and I took that personal, when like that one time I was thinking about that last night, that one game where they tried to hide Trae Young on Jaden McDaniels, and Jaden had literally like 10 points in the first 4 minutes of the game because he's like, I can play offense too, particularly if you're going to guard me with the 6'0" guy. And to Jaden's credit, he did that against Tyrese Maxey in the first half and had the 19 there. So it wasn't like, it was really flashbulb, the Embiid fouls, Nas is missing those shots. Everything is kind of a little dysregulated, but credit to Cat and McDaniels, who I thought played really well and took what the defense gave.
Right. And they were down 4 after 1, down 4 at the half, and down 3 at the end of 3 quarters. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was, despite some fluctuations within those quarters, including an 11-0 Wolves run to start the third quarter, right around the third quarter, that was their best ball of the night. But I do think, or I guess it was in the second quarter, but whenever it was, I am perplexed by the Jekyll and Hyde of McDaniels' game last night. In the first half, not only did he get 19 points, but he saw something on the film about the way the Sixers screen. He jumped at least 2 screens. One of them led to just totally a turnover on Maxey, just bottling him up. Another one was just a straight out steal. Mm-hmm. And
he did a little seatbelt celebration after one of them. Did you see that?
I was beginning to think that, he had figured something out in general, whereas I'm now, in retrospect, thinking that it was just a tendency of the way Philly sometimes set screens that somebody saw on the tape, maybe Jaden himself, maybe an assistant coach or whatever. But he was anticipating and preempting screens in a manner that really gave this team a big chance to win that game.
Yeah.
And then in the second half, Maxey was just too quick. He blitzed him.
Yeah. And he's fast.
He is very fast, but at the same time, I mean, Jaden has those guys, and something is up there. He had 2 points and
something's
a rough defensive second half.
Yeah. I mean, I've been thinking about that too. Like, that's the one player on the Wolves this year who you're like, hasn't met expectations thus far. But I go to, the
bar is high, but he has not met them.
Yeah. And like, we can kind of adjust the bar somewhat with he had the calf in training camp. Right. He rolled the ankle, missed 10 games or whatever.
The sacral contusion.
Yeah. Tailbone, it's called tailbone, whatever. Hurt that. So I don't know, maybe that's me being the glass half full. I've just kind of been like, he just hasn't been able to catch a rhythm due to defense or due to the injuries. And I think I still hold that. I think Jaden is a great defender, but the hardest people for him to guard, I think, probably are the Tyrese Maxeys and the De'Aaron Foxes and just that speed. I mean, there was, I don't know, like, you say 3 or 4 layups of Maxey at the rim where Jaden is just like 6 inches away from blocking it.
Yep.
And not because he was like a step slow, mostly because Maxey was a step fast. And again, it's kind of like do we blame the Wolves for the Embiid foul trouble? Or do we look at the pattern of Embiid does this every game? And Maxey has pretty much been doing this every game to Jaden McDaniels level defenders and worse, throughout the league. So it couldn't have been that what I was after the game. I was like, it just couldn't be Embiid 51 and Maxey 35. You maybe could have lived with the Embiid 51 if it was just
if Maxey had 18, right?
Yeah, which was, if I'm remembering correctly, I think that they lost that Chicago game, their previous one, because it was just all Embiid.
And Chicago beat the Lakers. I don't know what's up with the Bulls right now.
My thing, I watched the previous game. So they played Chicago this week, played Miami right before the Wolves did, the Sixers right before the Wolves did, and the Lakers right before the Wolves did. So I watched those last three Bulls games. They look good. I mean, I know they're the Bulls and it's this, but Levine's out and Kobe White and Patrick Williams
are having a good time.
Kobe White, man, he looks like Levine.
I know Kobe White does look good.
Yeah, which is whatever. That's.
But still, you're right. I mean, that is, and Caruso is Caruso.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Don't you think? Like, I've been kind of doing the Nickeil Alexander Walker Caruso comp. Don't you think that's kind of good?
I do. I think, especially given that, I think the difference is that Caruso has established a reliability that Nah doesn't quite have yet.
Where and what element of his game?
I think that Nah is a confidence player. When he's not confident of himself, he makes mistakes. And don't get me wrong, I'm one of the people who
we're just going off of the first bad.
One of the people who said early that I think Nah's having a better overall season than Jaden thus far. Mm-hmm. I mean,
Nah's been awesome. Yeah,
I'm fully on that bandwagon. But I will also say that if you ask me who I'd rather have today, I would take Caruso over Nah, simply because Caruso doesn't quit. I mean, not that Nah does, but Caruso has he's an established A1 defender. I think he's one of the 3 or 4 best on-ball defenders in the NBA.
Yeah. And Nickeil's what, like 12?
That's what I would say. I'd say top dozen. I think I may have even said that last night.
This is just devil's advocate. I think Nickeil has a lot more offensive game. That's what's been sticking out to me this year. It's just like the little extra game by game, pretty much, that I'm seeing from Nickeil offensively as a playmaker. And that was part of my reason for the Caruso comp, is like Caruso kind of plays point guard a lot. When you're like, you look at him and you're like, that's not really a point guard. And I feel the same way with Nickeil, but Nickeil, I think, is doing more and more of that little playmaking stuff, keeping his offensive game simple, but like slowly adding to the size of his bag over the course.
I think that's true. I would, without looking at the stats, I'm strictly eye test on this. I think Caruso's field goal percentage is probably right there
with Nickeil. Yeah.
I think that he doesn't shoot from long range nearly as much. And I think one area where Nah has really improved is
Caruso's 68.2 effective field goal percentage.
Yeah.
He's made 53% of his non-corner threes, 47% from 3 overall. So that's what's fueling it.
I mean, that's one thing. And then the other thing is he is really good on defense. And so where Nah has approached Caruso level, in my opinion, is this kind of vague bin called team defense that involves how seamlessly you switch, how well you just get kicked out or kick somebody else out when your man is different, how you match up in transition, how you go weak side to protect the baseline on a weak side cut. All these little things that don't really have a category, that Nah is doing extremely well, which Caruso has always done well. But I would say that where Nah is taking steps, the reason he's in the top dozen wing defenders, in my opinion now, is because not only is he good on ball, and not only is he good in switch partners and 2-man game, but he's good in the 5-man court vision desire to play team defense. And, I just think that, when he isn't that, it shows. And I think he was a victim of foul trouble last night a little bit, or at least the tenor of the game.
Yeah.
And getting back to your original point about Maxey getting by people, one of the things that happens is that Embiid gets bigs in foul trouble. So if Maxey does beat his man, odds are the bigs are not going to challenge him.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, there was a lot of that, like late.
Gobert was not having rim protection on his agenda when he got 3 or 4 fouls.
Brett, let's move over to a topic that you wrote about in your column the day before the Sixers game, which has obviously been just a trend that we've all been noticing with the Wolves, the slow starts versus the second half dominance. Yeah. They did actually start stronger against
it was a priority.
Right? Yeah, clearly, because this is a thing.
Right.
So maybe you could lay out for maybe some people who haven't looked up the numbers and stuff, how stark it is, how different the second half has been versus the first half of the Wolves.
In the first quarter, the Wolves defense ranked 17th in efficiency. I think they're 112.4 points per 100 possessions.
Okay.
They improved that only to 112.2 points, 0.2 of a point per 100 possessions in the second quarter. But by the second quarter, apparently either it's second units or offenses getting in a flow. They go from 17th in the NBA to 10th in the NBA in defensive efficiency. But then you get to the third quarter. This team is before the Sixers game, which I think changed things a bit, but they were at 98.5 or 98.4. And the next best team was the Sixers at 104 or 105.9. That is 7.5 points per 100 possessions. Not better than the rest of the league, better than the next best team.
It's crazy.
I mean, that is insane. And I think their net rating in the third quarter is like 15 or something. I mean, it's ridiculous. And so, and then to put the cherry on top, and you're going to have to show me sometime how to get quarter ratings from Cleaning the Glass, because I could not figure out how to get fourth quarter numbers from Cleaning the Glass. But anyway, the Wolves' fourth quarter, which because it was NBA.
Let's look at. I just pulled it up here. So this is after the Sixers game.
Okay.
The Wolves' third
quarter. So they
went
up from 98.5 to 98.7.
But to your point, the next best defense in the third quarter in the NBA is the Sixers at 106.3.
Which is still 7.6. It actually went up.
That's, I mean, and not everybody gets or really cares about this number. The point, what this means is teams are scoring less than a point per possession against the Wolves in third quarters, which is nuts. Because a great defense, a really good defense is like 1.1. And I know maybe that doesn't sound like that big, but that's a huge deal in an extrapolation. So just plus 17, even after last night, plus 17.9 overall for the Wolves in third quarter is just a massive shift. And
the way for people who don't care about analytics to look at it is this 100 where we talk about per 100 possessions. 100 possessions is the closest definition of what a game would be. Yeah. So if the Wolves played like they play in the third quarter, they would win games by 72 points. Because they're 18 points better than the opposition in the third quarter. And some of that, they're 7.5 points better, strictly on defense. If all things are equal on defense, if the Wolves played throughout the game like they play in the third quarter, and the offensive efficiencies, well, they can't be, obviously, because the Wolves are playing defense against them. But the point is 7.6, you're talking about a 30-point win because of their defense.
Yeah. So the question here is why? Like, why the difference? Because as good as
Yeah.
those numbers are in the third quarter, they're just about as bad in the first quarter
Mhm.
for the Wolves. And again, like we said, point of emphasis clearly for the Sixers game, and they came out stronger there. I'm just curious why this is happening, or why you think that's happening.
Well, I mean, this is a column I mean to write sometime, but I would imagine maybe John Krasinski will beat me to it, or somebody else will beat me to it. I've got this Christmas holiday that I'm kind of enforced with MinPost. But when it's halftime, we're going to get our Pepsis or whatever in the media room, right? And we walk up the ramp, and oftentimes we can't get in the media room because there are 4 assistant coaches, all of them defensive coaches, clustered around a computer screen, talking fairly urgently to each other about different things going on. It is
Defensively in particular.
in strictly, I mean, Elston Turner is in that mix right in the middle of it. There are 4 assistant coaches immediately saying, how are we getting hurt is obvious, and what are we doing well on the computer. And I'm sure one of these guys during the game, he's not watching the game so much as he's watching replays of things that have stood out to him.
I think it's Max Lefevre, who was the summer league coach. I think.
Okay.
Just for people who,
you
know, the diehard Wolves fans know who that is because they watch summer league.
Right. But so,
and maybe it's
those guys, if in fact appearance is reality, those guys are earning their money because players are getting instructed on what is or isn't working in that locker room. And Finch obviously deserves part of this credit. But whatever's happening, they are prepped to go out and kick ass on defense in the second half. Because even in the fourth quarter, the Wolves had the best defense in the fourth quarter too, even with the garbage time. Who knows what that'll wind up? Yeah. So, I mean, it's obviously the difference is not as great, but
it's still 107.5, and the second best team is 110, and the average team is 114. I mean, it's still, they're awesome in the fourth quarters defensively.
Right. So it's just, and I think some of it is that Mike Conley plays a lot more in the second half than he plays in the first half. And Mike Conley is an underrated defensive gem, strictly because he knows all the little things about how not to get beat. I think he is wearing down, by the way. I think that he's turning the ball over a lot more, and his defense has a few more flaws than it did before. But, it's all relative. You want your 36-year-old.
I just think his minutes were like super managed last night because of the back-to-back.
Yeah, exactly. But in general, though, I just think that he's beginning to wear down, as to be expected. I mean, it is one of the things. That's why I'm not going to bang the drum for J-Mac. I did that a part or two ago, and you were absolutely right. That's not going to happen. So there's no point in talking about it. But I do think that the quality of their point guard play, Nah is still much better on defense than he is on offense. And while he has been very good, especially in 2-man games with Nas on offense, I think that there's meat on the bone, as they say, on that.
So, okay. So we talked about that great anecdote to bring up about the coaches and the defense for the second half. I'm stealing this from Chase, but he brought it up when we were talking. I think he's kind of asking some of the players after the last home game about this, the first quarter offense, right?
Right.
It hasn't been there.
The different things thrown at him, right?
And I thought that was a great theory by Jace, is they come out into a game and don't know how the opponent is going to be matching up with them, which leads them to kind of, for the first 4 or 5 minutes of the first quarter, kind of just jab, right? And figure out, where are we? What are we doing here? I think he brought that up after the Miami game. And And I thought a perfect example of that was the Heat started Kevin Love in that game against the Wolves. And I don't think the Wolves were expecting that. And I'm half going off of Jim Pete was saying, you know, in the entrance to the game that Karl was going to guard Jimmy.
I know, it's just crazy.
And then, well, but he might have had Love not started and they started Richardson.
I wouldn't recommend that, but
well,
I mean,
but
no, I know.
That's not what we're talking about.
I know.
So I just came out and I'm like, okay, Kevin Love's in the game. You have one of, if not the best pick and roll centers in the league. Like, they're just going to hit that right away, right? Like, they're going to just try and play Love off the floor. And eventually they did, but again, they jabbed for 4 or 5 minutes before. Do you remember that when they just ran those 2 empty corners right away with Conley and Gobert? So I think that's just an example to be like, they don't know exactly what the opponent's plan is to match up with them. To match up with their offense, and they kind of figure it out through the first half. So then in the second half, when they come back out, like, you kind of know Kevin Love is going to start, or so-and-so is going to be on Ant or Conley or whatever. And I think that given this funky roster construction, I think that is an important element, you know, to this team.
And I think another factor is that Jaden is, I think, grows into the game some on defense. And the person who really is a prisoner of his attitude, but it can be a great thing, it can be a bad thing, is Ant. And Ant has been much more consistent on defense game to game this year, but there's still gaps. And they're often in the beginning of games, in the first quarter, especially, where Ant hasn't really gotten juiced to play defense. I just feel like there are times when just compare Ant late in the third quarter or early in the fourth quarter or whenever he's in the meat of the game to his first 3 or 4 touches of a game. The intensity is just very different. And I think that also translates into defense. I think that McDaniels' health and maybe disinclination to get in foul trouble and Ant's time to warm up are 2 other factors that may play a role in the defense.
I would agree with that. I think I'm trying to think about it as like, okay, how do you set the tone more in the first quarter, right? Like what are and I think again that the Gobert and Love thing, that's not an option every single game, but what you want to do is you want to like smash one of the opponent's eggs right there. And it's just like, this plan we came out with, smash, it's done. You know, they're not going to run that again for the next 45 minutes. And I wonder, just this is more broadly and not opponent specific, but can you smash the opponent's plan against Karl in the first 5 minutes of the game? Like, I would like to see that. And this is by no means
because
like
Karl is a matchup nightmare.
Exactly. It's a compliment, you know? And I wonder if there's multiple ways to do that, right? And Karl has been doing that, kind of did in the Harris matchup last game by, you know, taking guys off the dribble, trying to draw fouls and get to the basket. And that's worked. That's oftentimes smashed that plan, right? And the team needs to adjust and guard him differently. I wonder if a more consistent and bankable one is like, again, rather than that run in the first play of the game to be a Rudy Gobert duck in, can it be a double pin down for Karl? And we're just saying, hey, in the first 4 possessions, Karl's taken 2 threes out of these 4. We are scripting actions on every one of those possessions where our first read here is a Karl 3. And I think by setting that tone against the opponent too, and if he hits 1 or 2 of those in the first couple possessions, you like the opponent needs to react, right? And accommodate accordingly. Plus, I think if Karl does hit those first 2 in the first couple of minutes, he goes, 2 for 3 from deep. I think it's pretty likely that he shoots 6, 7 more for the rest of the game. And point. You know what I'm saying? And I just think the volume is not there. And it isn't to say that Karl's isn't playing great offensively. It's like, man, that might be another level that that
Right.
not only gets Carl better, but addresses one of the quote unquote weaknesses of this really good team, which is first quarter offense.
And as an adjunct to that, one of the things that the Wolves did for a while, at least 3 or 4 games in a row, and it was cool, is the high pick and roll where Conley does that step back 3.
Yeah.
Why not run that? And they did run that like in the first half dozen plays for a few games in a row. And Conley is, I mean, you can bank on 40% from that dude from 3. And so if you mix in those two things, Cat from deep and Conley from deep, you got 2 40% shooters out there. And, I think that what Finch prefers is the bully ball template, just to put that seed in the mind of opponents. Hey, we're big, we're coming at you, and we're going to squash you. But there are other ways. If all of a sudden it's like Embiid, he's a big dude. Instead, he's coaxing you to death. I mean, if the Wolves are suddenly bombing you to death from outside, despite the fact that they have 3 centers in their first 6 guys in the rotation, then that's unique, and that's hard to game plan against, because if you put smalls on the floor to try to get to Cat and Conley, well, then you have those original plays you've scripted before. You get Rudy on a roll, or you get Ant driving weak side or whatever. So I agree that the first halves can be better. I don't think we'd be paying as much attention to it if the second halves weren't just so glorious.
No. Right. And you're right. That is the frame in which we're looking at this through. But, as I think we're all want to do after a loss, you start going,
how can the perfect be better?
Yeah, right. And so I just I pulled this up, I have it up on the screen, like the last 5 games 3-point volume for this team. I'm just looking at Carl mostly. I was like, because part of me was like, is he not shooting well? It's like, no, over the last 5 games, he's shooting 40% from 3, but it's just 6 of 15. And I'm like, okay, how does that compare to everyone else? Over the last 5 games, Naz Reid, 16 for 35, 46%. Anthony Edwards, 11 for 28 from 3, 39%. Over the last 5 games, Mike Conley, 12 for 23 from 3, 52%. Troy Brown Jr. has taken more threes than Carl over the last 5 games. In 95 fewer minutes, 7 of 18 from 3, 39%. Carl, 6 of 15, 40%. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, 7 of 15, 47%. Jaden McDaniels, 5 of 12, 42%.
Boy, that is great shooting.
Great shooting over the last 5 games. So maybe that's jarring this a little bit differently. But man, I'm just looking at it. I'm like, okay, so Carl's 6th on the team in 3-point makes.
But you know what Cat would counter?
Yeah.
Check those free throws.
Yeah, that's true. He has 28 in those 5 games. Next most is Ant with 20, and nobody else has double digits. That's it.
And he's also 9 better in terms of free throw mix. He's shooting 90% from the line, and has been all year. I mean, it's almost enough to counter the 3-point bonus.
Right.
I mean, if you can shoot 90% from the line and get, as it turns out, Cat is also shooting almost like 56, 57% from 2, 40% from 3. He's a 50, 40, 90 guy. But
you don't want to disrupt all that, right?
I don't want to. I mean, I'm playing devil's advocate as much as anything. I agree with you. You and I have, we've got our gold cards for Cat needs to shoot more threes. It's been at least 8 years in a row now. I mean, that we've renewed our membership.
Yeah. And Finch too. He's a subscriber.
Well, Finch, no, he's about a 3-year man.
Yeah, but he's a subscriber.
He is now, right?
Yeah. I guess the question is, how do you get Carl to be a subscriber to that, or maybe
tell him that he needs to drive more.
So do the opposite.
What Cat likes to do is, if you say you're really good at this, you should do that more often instead of this. They'll say, well, no, I'm really good at this too. Let me show you. I mean, it is the fact that he can do everything is the thing that we have to remember, and he keeps on trying to prove the point. And again,
and he has been doing it too. Like,
well,
none of this is to
that's
take
the
away.
thing. I mean, Cat, like I said, the idea that Cat is the most level-headed player on the floor last night, playing against Joel Embiid, and actually having one play where he went through Embiid, put the bucket in, and then gave a flex very casually after he got the foul, drained the foul, and trotted back up the court. I mean, there was a time when, we would have been throwing confetti if that had happened, So Cat is, I probably rip Cat more than, certainly in public. A lot of people rip him more privately. But I think I probably rip Cat in public more than anybody. And I'm here to say that one of the main reasons this team is 20-6 is because he has found a space that is good in his head, is good on the court, and is good in the locker room. And that trifecta, I didn't think was possible.
Well, I think let's grab another break here. I think that's a good way to segue into talking a little bit about the Miami game too, because Carl fueled that himself too by finding the right ways to be effective offensively while also maintaining his head against Jimmy Butler. So take a break and be back with Britt. All right, Brett, let's talk about that Miami game. Obviously, the fourth quarter is what stands out in that as much as anything. It was the pattern of rough first half into just blitzing the opponent and shutting them down. I mean, I think the Heat had 16
just
points.
Basically taking the legs out, turning their legs into jelly, turning their hearts into dust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then it was pretty dusty in the fourth quarter and they just kept going, so I've already talked about it a little bit, but I'm just, I guess maybe specific to Carl in that fourth quarter, which is interesting. He only had 2 points in that fourth quarter, but it felt like he was driving it because it was with Jimmy guarding him. He scored on him, which I think fueled some fire into the group. He had that drop off pass to Ant for the dunk. He grabbed the offensive rebound over Jimmy's head through the lob to Rudy there. That was
well, to overstate the dynamic. It's not my preferred dynamic, but it is one of the reasons people are talking about this in particular, is that in the crudest possible terms, Jimmy called Cat a pussy and thought that Cat was a wimp, not able to be tough enough, rough enough, committed enough to play basketball the way Jimmy Butler likes to play basketball. Mm-hmm. The other night, Jimmy tried to sell a foul, which was a bullshit move on a play, it was Embiidish, to have a play where Cat just nudged him with his shoulder to create a little space. Who does that more often in the NBA right now than Jimmy Butler?
Yeah, right.
And Butler tried to sell it, and Cat canned the shot. First of all, Cat had the wherewithal to think about nudging Butler off the ball. Secondly, had the poise enough to hit the shot. And then, enlivened by that, goes back down the court, comes back in the next possession, gets the rebound over Butler, and instead of running over Butler, which is what he would have done 9 out of 9 times previously, probably getting an offensive foul off that offensive rebound, instead he throws a little 6-foot lob to Gobert for an easy ducket. That is self-possession. And what that is the old Cat would have been in his bedroom dreaming up these types of scenarios by which to embarrass Jimmy Butler. And instead, Cat just takes the flow of the game and does exactly what old Cat would have dreamed about doing, but never be able to do because he was too busy dreaming. I mean, that's the beauty of this, is that Cat is becoming somebody who can tap into things that he wasn't able to get into before because he was in his own way. And that's one of the reasons they're 20-6.
Dreams do come true.
Exactly. Eventually.
No, I mean, it's, we're doing this thing like so day to day, right?
Right.
I mean, I know you write a weekly column, but we get in this pattern of, okay, this
Yeah,
game
you can
happened,
get
this,
you can get tunnel vision and narrow vision.
yeah, or just a little hyper fixated on the most recent thing, and
Well,
what.
somebody who does like 14 podcasts a week, I think you probably do that.
Yes, this is the Hyperfixation Wolves podcast brought to you by the Genesis Company. But it's, I think in some of that recency stuff, we, whatever, have missed on the consistency of Cat. And I've done a lot of like, man, the consistency of Rudy's defense and the impact of that, because it's like it's this one specific thing, particularly from Rudy in a fourth quarter, like that is just reliable, right. And you're like, I'm lauding that consistency. And because Carl has a more diverse game on both sides of the floor, obviously, than Rudy does. It's harder to focus in on a specific positive, and what I think need to do is go, open up the umbrella and be like, look at the last month. And me, you, and John were talking about that on Media Row. And I think you said, you're like, is this the best month of Cat's career? And right. I was like, what? Like that was my initial reaction. Yeah. And then I'm like, well, one, this is the most winning month of Carl's career. So that in and of itself, like, puts it into the top 5.
Right.
And then I'm like, no, you guys were right. Like, this probably is the best month of basketball of Carl's career, not just because they're winning, but because of the multitude of different ways that he's impacting.
And that's the thing. Cat used to have tremendous highs and was dogged by some lows, but also, in addition to having highs and lows with his main skill sets, had a pretty consistent mediocrity or sub-mediocrity with some other things.
Yeah.
And what he's done is he's shored up his weaknesses and sustained his strengths, but not so that he's hitting peaks. Cat, clearly, you properly pointed out when we were having this discussion that during the time when Ryan had the team and Cat had the green light, that
once he took over for Tibbs, yeah.
He was a terror in terms of his scoring. He was phenomenal. And he's not that now, but part of that is circumstance. And part of that is also that he is doing other things. His fancy pantsy passing, for example, the slingshot passes, the over-the-shoulder dekes, all this other stuff. He doesn't do that nearly as much as he was doing before.
For sure.
The defensive awareness and, the idea of I go after 20-80 balls, because I can get them 25% of the time or whatever, that kind of stupidity. That's not there anymore.
Yeah.
He knows when he can chase something down or at least make an impact. He has a little bit more instinct for the game. I do think the structure that he's been forced to adhere to, because power forward is a new beast to him, has been helpful to him. But I think that the reason I think this has been Cat's best month now, probably best 6 weeks of his career, is because I don't see glaring weaknesses out of the guy. And I see maybe he's not getting 10 off the high board anymore, but he's getting a lot of 8-8s and 8-9s. And very rarely does he belly flop. And so that is, again, that's preferable. He doesn't give you the highlights perhaps as often as he used to, but he is more valuable than ever.
I think what makes it his best offensive month his best month is the inclusion of the defense. Absolutely. And that, if we are comparing to that 2018-19 season when Cat was phenomenal, it was the year that his offense was No. 2018-19. This was the year he didn't.
Oh, you mean the great offense, right?
Yeah,
right.
the great offense.
Terrible on defense, right?
Yeah, he was, and I think that was actually part of the reason why Gobert, ironically, got All NBA that season, and it was the $35 million.
Yeah, that's when I would have voted for Gobert. I remember that. I remember for a while there, I might have had a vote and cost Cat millions of dollars.
I didn't have that.
Going to be fun.
Yeah, I just remember like writing an article about it and like actually looking at, is this the best stretch of Karl's career? And this was
right.
In 2019, I came to that answer being yes, but I was totally or largely dismissing defense. And I think part of that his defense wasn't great then. And part of that was because back then, I remember I would always say like the hope is that Karl can get to mediocrity defensively. Can he be a 50th percentile center? And so, like back then that year, whatever, he was like 40th percentile. And you're like, okay, it's like, there's not that much gap between what I perceive his defensive ceiling to be. And
do you remember why Finch invoked the high wall? I'm sorry, I'm sure I interrupted you when your train of thought.
No, because he wanted to activate Karl defensively on the perimeter.
But he used the word protect. Mm-hmm. We need to protect Karl on defense.
Yeah. And I think what they did in Denver with Jokic.
And what they meant by that was we don't want to put him in situations where he's terrible, which is drop coverage.
Yeah.
Because his feet are too big and his awareness is not great. His quick decision making is not great. And now, quite frankly, I think it can be said that his comfort level was he always was, I think, painfully aware that he wasn't measuring up as a drop coverage center.
Well, and so that actually wasn't you cutting me off. That's a great segue into what I was going to say is before the Miami game, I was just thinking about this. I'm like, am I underrating, Karl's defense? And I just like ripped through a bunch of the clips and I looked up the numbers specifically of him defending in pick and roll. And, this is a couple days old, but of the players who have defended over 100 pick and rolls this season, Karl was second best in the NBA. It was Evan Mobley at number 1 with 0.58 against that. Karl Anthony Towns, number 2, 0.698. Number 3, Max Strus, 0.736. Dorian Finney-Smith, 0.746. Number 5 was Jared Allen, 0.760.
Wow.
And it's not just looking at those numbers. I was also watching the clips of it, and it is broadly in drop coverage in those situations when he's defending a pick and roll that way as the one defending the big. But the difference is the depth of the drop. I think it's not all the way. He's not playing up the touch. He's not doing all that, but it's not a deep drop. And I thought that was always a flaw in Tibbs's strategy with him, which was like daring the guy to get a head full of steam to come into Karl, who wasn't that big of a wall. He wasn't Embiid at the rim. He wasn't Rudy at the rim. Right.
Absolutely.
And was asking for that. So I think there's this, there's like he's navigating that space well and through the coaching and finding, what is my distance? How do I do these? And also it's not all that often because so many of Karl's minutes are on the floor with Rudy. So you really, if you're an opponent, you really need to be like, okay, Gobert is off the floor, Towns is off the floor. We are shifting our entire offense to attack this, to be able to do it. But teams are just occasionally, going at him in pick and roll. It's not like it doesn't feel like a key part of their offensive game plan to attack him. And in that somewhat more limited volume or someone less frequent attacking of him, he's just doing a great job. And the numbers bear that out. And, part of that is being boosted by having 4 really great defenders around him at all times. That's a big factor from now compared to that 2019 time with Saunders.
I think a lot of that is Rudy has set a standard for what the people around him need to do that Cat benefits from when Rudy is off the floor.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's important. And I just think that also verticality, you talk about not deep, as much of a deep drop. Yeah. What that means is it would be silly for Cat to try to exercise great verticality when chances are his arms would wind up getting entangled with the rim.
Mhm.
If he's like 4 feet out and he gets vertical, he has learned. I mean, it doesn't happen all the time, but he's not coming down on people. He's coming straight up. And sometimes he gets whistled anyway because he's not super athletic. But it's still, it's a much better. I don't feel like Cat's committing physically dumb fouls.
Yeah, well, it's fewer blocking fouls, like, with, your feet aren't set, you're getting called for the block because you're hip checking the guy. It's more like he's still getting a lot of fouls, but it's more in the like under the basket situation. The guy he's guarding is pumped, gone into him, and then he comes down and fouls on him there. I think it was more problematic or maybe more maddening when he was getting the blocking fouls. And those are kind of like the fouls he was getting all the time setting offensive screens, those sort of things. He's largely taken those two elements of that he was a prolific fouler, and it's going down. I at least to my eye test.
No, I agree.
We can measure that exactly, but I think that's a huge win, and it's crazy the fouling is still as high as it is.
Right.
But maybe that's an indication that it will get better over time as he gets better at just staying straight up and not fouling under the basket.
And what I want to see, and I'm not trying to telescope too far, I'm enjoying day by day, week by week, month by month here, but will he be able to keep his poise and the team be able to do what they do in the crucible of the playoffs? I think that is going to be extremely important in terms of whether or not he's going to have a great year next year and the year after and the year after, whether he's going to earn this $60 million a year that he's going to be getting paid, is going to be whether or not this team develops a Nuggets-like ability to coalesce even more as the conditions get tighter. And there are national people around the league who are paying attention to the Wolves all of a sudden, who are beginning to think, hey, I mean, we used to mock these guys. Something has happened here.
Right.
And we've watched them enough. I don't think I can get there yet, but I'm enjoying the hell out of this, and I am feeling protective about their sustainability simply because it's so enjoyable. But there is a part of me that wants to see a 4-game losing streak and what happens.
No, I think what you want to see is a crucible. Like you said, the crucible of the playoffs. And I would say maybe they're in the crucible right now.
Well, they kind of are. I mean, they're in that 16 games. Yeah. And they're what are they, 4-2 or 3-2?
Yeah. So I think it's, let's check back in a week. That will have been about a 7-game series of, a really difficult stretch where they've broadly played really well. They lose the Pelicans game and they lose the Sixers game, but not in like a devastating fashion.
And string 3 wins in between. And so exactly. The thing is if they finish 500, if they're 8-8 on this 16-game streak as of January 11th, they will be 25-12 with the tough part of their schedule behind them.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, to me, the ratification that I'm looking for. I'm looking for.
So the question is, all right, and I'm with you. 8-8 would be great, and you'd be 25-12, and that's awesome. If they go 11-5 in this 16-game stretch of playing all above 500 teams, 11 of the 16 on the road,
then they're 28-9.
Sure, but do you relent on some of the concern you have about the crucible of the playoffs?
Some of it, yes. Some of it I do. Okay. On the other hand, all it will take is a 2-1 deficit, in the first 3 games of the first round to bring all those questions back,
Right. But the reality of the situation is we're not there and we won't be there until we're there.
Right.
And
don't want to look ahead. But I couldn't help but say, I don't want to be.
No, that's fine.
I'm in the moment. I am great with this. And we actually had that discussion about the scout, who's basically assuming you throw all this goodness out the window because I know the formula to beat the Wolves. And I just thought the arrogance of that was kind of bullshit. But there is a tiny bit of what he says that's right. There is a prove it factor that can only be.
The team he scouted for got popped by the Wolves recently too. So
yes. Yeah, and also, by the way, if they happen to enter the playoffs, the book on them is going to be pretty fucking easy.
All right. Do you have anything else you want to hit on here? Otherwise, I mean, we got to go to this game here pretty soon. I gotta get a Christmas present before we go. And
there you go. Hey, are we doing anything between Christmas and New Year's?
Yeah. That's probably good for me to just say in general. The schedule is actually going to stay pretty much the same even through this. Kyle and I are going to record tomorrow after the Lakers game on Friday, and then the Wolves play again on Saturday against the Kings. Chris and I are going to record on Sunday morning, Christmas Eve, and then I'm going to take a couple days off until after the Thunder game, which is on the 26th. So there won't be a show on the 25th, the 26th. The next one will be on the 27th, and then you and I will go. I have that written down somewhere, but we'll go. I think Thursday next week too, if that works for you. So
sounds fine. Yeah,
we'll hit another one. I mean, Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, it's kind of over the weekend here, so we will do a Christmas Eve show, but then none for a couple days. But we'll be back rolling with it next week too, as long as that's cool with you to go.
Sure, it sounds good. And
we can talk about your great trades article.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you might as well take advantage of covering the team for 34 of its 35 years of existence.
Yeah.
And so and also the fact that I think most of the MinPost staff will get a righteous week and a half off, I think, over the holidays or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I needed to write something that could sustain that period of time. You could read it, like on the tomorrow, or you could read it on New Year's Day or whatever. So what I decided to write was the 5 best and the 5 worst trades in Timberwolves franchise history. And
it's very Bleacher Report of you, Brett.
Well, I know that's an insult without even reading Bleacher Report.
Well, it's the hot headline, I'm actually I'll check that out. We'll probably talk about it. It's going to be some like obscure trade from '96 that I.
There's one from '95.
Yeah, exactly. I knew it. All right. Well, Britt has another column up off of that Miami game and just kind of this team of late on MinPost. You can find that on his Twitter feed or at minpost.com. We'll look for that trade article here coming up soon. Yeah, appreciate you doing it.
Hey, my pleasure.
All right. Until Friday morning, afternoon with Kyle Teige after the Lakers game. He's Britt. I'm Dane. Peace out. How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, yeah. Green and hot so you can find me in the crowd, yeah. Don't let standards ever bring you down, yeah.